Okay, for this set of notes, we're going to talk about your specific defenses, and you should have a note sheet to follow along. So make sure you have your note sheet out. In the first and second lines of defense, we talked about non-specific defenses. Those are your defenses against all invaders to your body, no matter what the invader is. The macrophages always eat it. No matter what the invader is, the skin always protects you against it. The specific defenses, i.e. your immune system, is tailor-made to specifically that each individual disease. So it says here, once a pathogen makes it past the non-specific defenses and begins to multiply in the body, the immune system designs a very specific attack against that pathogen. The immune system attacks different pathogens in different ways, hence specific defenses. Now, before we talk about specifically how the immune system designs its attack, let's talk about the organs of the immune system, which are, you might think you know your body, and there's a lot of things you still don't know. First of all, the bone marrow. What's the significance of the bone marrow? Well, the bone marrow is where the white blood cells are made. It's in the large bones of your body. Some cells mature here, and they're called B cells for bone marrow. Others travel to the thymus. Obviously, T cells are the ones that travel to the thymus, and so they're called T cells because they mature in the thymus. Lymph nodes are also an organ of the immune system, and those are what your doctor checks for when you go into the doctor when you're feeling sick, and they feel the glands under your chin and down your neck. They're looking to see if your lymph glands are swollen. Lymph glands filter pathogens from the lymph. We'll explain what that is in just a minute. And they contain large numbers of white blood cells. They swell when you're sick, and that'll make more sense in just a moment. And finally, the last organ that we're going to talk about is the spleen. The spleen is that red tongue-like thing on the left side, the person's left side. It filters pathogens from the blood, and it contains white blood cells. The spleen is very blood rich, and if somebody damages the spleen, it is possible to die of internal bleeding because of damage to the spleen. And it is also possible to live without the spleen, but people who are living without their spleens are immunosuppressed. Okay, so I said I would explain what lymph was. If you look carefully at that diagram, it might be a diagram you've never actually seen before. We've all seen diagrams of our circulatory system, of our blood vessels. You've probably seen diagrams of your nervous system, all the nerves throughout your body. But at this point in your life, you may never have seen your lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is a series of tubes that sucks fluids that are seeping out of your cells, and those fluids get sucked out and then transferred back into blood vessels in your neck, where it's recycled so that you don't dehydrate too quickly. The fluid is called lymph, and it might carry foreign particles. For example, if you've cut yourself and you've got dirt in that cut, the lymphatic system might suck up that dirt, and so it carries those foreign particles. There might be microorganisms like bacteria or parasites, and it might have tissue debris of any cells that maybe were damaged in an injury. The lymph nodes then filter the fluid that's traveling through the lymphatic system, and the lymph nodes contain white blood cells. Specifically, they contain lymphocytes. When a person is sick, the bacteria or virus might get sucked up by the lymph and then identified by the white blood cells that are in the lymph glands. They begin to multiply, and that causes the lymph glands to start swelling. So when an individual is ill, the doctors check the lymph glands to get a sense of how hard the body is fighting off the illness. Okay, so the question is, how does the immune system actually start? And we have talked about this before. You have white blood cells that are constantly rolling through your body, touching every single cell of your body. Your body cells have proteins on their surface. They happen to be called MHC proteins, and those proteins are particular. They are unique to you as an individual. They are as unique as fingerprints, and your white blood cells recognize your MHC proteins. When they see an MHC or touch an MHC protein, they know not to attack. However, cells that are infected with viruses are able to push those proteins from the viruses to the surface of the MHC protein. Do you see those red dots now on the MHC proteins? Now, when a white blood cell rolls by this cell, it's going to touch the MHC protein that has the viral antigen on it, so now it will be a foreign protein, and the white blood cell now will know to attack. Bacteria also possess these foreign surface proteins, so in the same way, if a white blood cell touches it, it knows to attack. Okay, so the macrophages go rolling through your whole body, inspecting the surface markers, the MHC proteins of all cells. When an unfamiliar surface protein, an antigen, is encountered, the macrophage eats the cell, or in this case, in the diagram, they're showing you diagrams of viruses. The viruses are holding, in this diagram, green arrows. Those green arrows represent their foreign proteins, their antigens. So you see that the macrophage has eaten a virus and it's holding one of the foreign proteins up on its surface. The macrophage then releases a chemical called interleukin-1. Interleukin-1 is a chemical warning that stimulates helper T cells. Now we're going to find out in a little bit that helper T cells are sort of the generals of this battle, the battle against this invader. These generals tell everybody else what to do. Okay, so the macrophage travels around looking for a specific helper T cell that has a matching antigen receptor. You have many, many, many helper T cells, but if their receptor doesn't match, kind of like a little puzzle piece, then it's not the right helper T cell. This is where the immune system is specific. It's specific to the particular disease. If the helper T cell doesn't have the exact receptor, it's not the right helper T cell, and the macrophage keeps looking until it finds it. Once it finds the correct helper T cell, the macrophage causes that helper T cell and the helper T cell's buddies to divide. The helper T cells then start releasing another chemical called interleukin-2. Interleukin-2 has two functions, one of which is to stimulate the division of cytotoxic T cells. Now, the cytotoxic T cells are sort of the hand-to-hand combat soldiers in this battle. If you look at the diagram, you see the large macrophage. It has released interleukin-1 to a helper T cell. The helper T cell then releases interleukin-2. That interleukin-2 spurs on or encourages the cytotoxic T cells to start dividing. The cytotoxic T cells then go directly to infected cells and poke holes in those infected cells. So any cells that are harboring, say a virus in this case, any cells that are harboring a virus, they're going to be destroyed. Now, as an aside, there are also cells called suppressor T cells, and the suppressor T cells are the ones that eventually are going to stop the immune response. Remember that you don't want your immune system dividing constantly because it takes an enormous amount of energy. So the suppressor T cells, it's their job to stop the response once the infection has been fought. Now there is a second side to this battle, and we'll do that next. Now, in addition to the hand-to-hand combat soldiers, the cytotoxic T cells who are poking holes in infected cells, there's a branch of this battle that's sort of like long-range artillery, like missiles in a real war. What happens first is the macrophages, again, encourage the helper T cells, and the helper T cells then encourage the B cells to begin dividing. Now, the B cells don't travel to the site of infection. They typically hang out in the lymph glands. What they do is they divide within the lymph glands, and then they start shooting. I'm trying to draw this war analogy here. They start shooting antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that stick to the invader and they inactivate it. So if you see in the diagram, you have B cells. The B cells form another kind of a cell called a plasma cell. And these plasma cells start releasing antibodies, those Y-shaped things that are in the diagram. The antibodies then cover the virus particle. Now, once the virus particle is covered in antibodies, it can no longer infect a cell, and the macrophages can come along and eat it. So now you've had two parts to the immune response. The cytotoxic T cells poked holes in the cells, that's your hand-to-hand combat, and the plasma cells, the B cells, are shooting these missiles, and that's your long-range artillery. Now, and just to be clear, the cells that were infected were taken care of by the cytotoxic T cells, and any free-floating viruses are taken care of by these antibodies being shot off by the plasma cells. All right, once the infection is over, once all of the cells that have been infected have had holes poked in them by the cytotoxic T cells, and once all of the invaders have been inactivated by the antibodies being sprayed on them, Some B cells are left behind. They're called memory cells, and those B cells remain to defend against future attacks by the same pathogen. Take a look at the chart below or the graph below. The first exposure to the pathogen, your immune response takes some time, and during the time that it takes your immune response to kick into gear, you start to feel really sick. It takes time to find the helper T cells. It takes time to get the T cells and the B cells to divide. It takes time to release the antibodies. During that time, you feel lousy. But if you ever encounter that same pathogen again, because you have these patrolling memory B cells, they release antibodies very, very quickly, so quickly that you don't even know you ever got sick again. You might feel fatigued, but your body fights off the disease so fast that you never notice that it happened again. Now, just to be clear, students are always wondering, well, why do I come down with a cold 6 times a year if I have these memory B cells? The issue with the common cold is that it's constantly mutating. So you have memory B cells for the cold that you had 6 weeks ago, but today, if you encounter a new mutation of the common cold, your memory B cells aren't effective against it, and you have to start from point 1 all over again. All right, now we're going to switch gears just a bit. We're going to talk about autoimmune diseases. Auto means self, and immune obviously is your immune system. There are individuals who have immune system disorders where their immune system attacks their own tissues. And let's talk about how that happens. First of all, you need to understand that every white blood cell born in the body should have different receptors from all other white blood cells. So it's a program in your body that creates different shaped receptors. This provides maximum protection against any possible disease ever in the history of the world or ever in the future of the world. However, sometimes white blood cells are born that have receptors for your own proteins. This means that they would attack, these white blood cells theoretically would attack your own tissues. So these white blood cells are supposed to be destroyed by the body immediately so that they don't begin attacking your body. Unfortunately, people with autoimmune diseases, these particular white blood cells do not get destroyed, and so these white blood cells do begin attacking their tissues. It depends which tissues they're attacking, what symptoms they experience. There are 4 very common autoimmune diseases that many people have heard of. The first one we'll talk about is lupus. Lupus presents with many different kinds of symptoms, but the one thing we will point out is that a characteristic of lupus is something that's called the butterfly rash, a bright red rash on the nose and cheeks, and that's something that doctors learn to identify when a patient walks in their office. When they see that rash, they sometimes know to test for lupus. Another example is rheumatoid arthritis. In rheumatoid arthritis, the immune system is attacking the joints, the tissues of the joints, and causing that disfiguring. It can happen in any joint. It doesn't have to be the fingers. It can happen in the spinal column or the hips or the shoulders. It is different than osteoarthritis, which is a normal kind of arthritis, often because of injuries earlier in life. Rheumatoid arthritis is when the immune system is attacking the joints. The third type of autoimmune disease is multiple sclerosis. If you look at the CAT scan, you see sort of little pockets of white dots. Those are called plaques, and those are indicative of multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis occurs when the immune system attacks the coating on the nerve cells. The nerve cells begin to short each other out, and symptoms for MS are very varied, but often include muscle weakness. The fourth type of autoimmune disease is called Graves' disease, and this picture is a little bit exaggerated, but Graves' disease is when the immune system attacks the thyroid. The thyroid is a gland on the larynx, your voice box, and one of the symptoms of a thyroid that's not working correctly is puffy eyes. It adds pressure to the eyes, and so people oftentimes with thyroid disorders have large eyes, and so Graves' disease is one cause of many for a thyroid disorder. And so when doctors see a patient that presents with especially large eyes and then some other symptoms, they know, you know what, hey, why don't we take a look at your thyroid to see what's going on. All right, last slide, we're almost done. The difference between active and passive immunity. Active immunity is long-term immunity that arises after fighting off a disease. That makes sense, people get that. The part that you're most likely to make a mistake on or forget about is that vaccines give active immunity, not passive immunity. The reason we say it's active immunity is that the vaccines are actually giving you the disease, a weakened form of the disease, but they are giving you the disease, so your body is fighting it off and it's creating its own memory cells. So it should be lifelong immunity. Passive immunity, on the other hand, is just temporary immunity, lasting maybe up to 6 weeks. And it's when a person receives the antibodies from another person. That almost never happens except in the case of breastfeeding. When a woman breastfeeds her babies, her antibodies are transferred to the baby. That is one of the reasons that doctors really want women to breastfeed their babies. Babies have immature immune systems that don't function well, and by receiving breast milk, they have a booster to their immune system. That booster only lasts for 6 weeks, and then once the mother stops breastfeeding, the baby no longer has that protection. I will just mention also there is such a thing as a gamma globulin shot where you can receive antibodies if you're traveling maybe to an area of the world where there are diseases, sometimes third world countries, people can get a gamma globulin shot which passes on immunity, but again, it's only temporary. That's it.